Hello everyone, welcome to the Gaming Zone. I'm your host, Mr. VIB113 here today with a review of the game Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem for the Nintendo GameCube. Now before I start the review, I just want to say, Eternal Darkness was one of those games that I remember playing way back in 2003, around a year after the game came out. I wasn't able to play the game when it first came out, but that's because I wasn't aware of the game until a friend told me about the game, saying how scary the game was and how mentally twisted it was and how it screws with your head, because of the supposed sanity system that the game brought to the table. I was already a huge fan of Resident Evil by this point, and a friend told me the game was very similar to it, along with the fact that it was a survival horror game, so I decided to give the game a look, and to my surprise, this game was amazing, and very frightening, because of just how the game messes with your head, something I thought my friend was lying to me about. Around that time, I was scared shitless of this game, just as much as I was scared of the game Clock Tower. Now, Eternal Darkness was first announced in E3 in 1999. It would be developed by the company Silicon Knights and would be released in the year 2000 for the Nintendo 64. The game was said to be the first psychological horror game that would feature a new type of system known as the sanity system, that would bring a whole new type of survival horror to the table. It was a type of system that would allow the player to be able to feel the torment and the torture that the player was feeling in the game, along with the game itself to be able to screw with the player that was playing the game, doing certain things to the player like telling the player that the game was muted, or say the controller was unplugged, or make the game flip upside down, or hell, even make the game fade to black. Shortly after, the game got a lot of people interested and curious about the project. The game shortly started to build up a fan base, and Silicon Knights was very happy about their project. A new and fresh concept for a survival horror game? How could this go wrong? Even though the game had so much hype and so many fans couldn't wait to see this game released, Silicon Knights had some problems during the game's development. Well, for one, the game was going to be released in the year 2000. Around the same time, the Nintendo 64 was already starting to look like an old console and was starting to die out. Not many people were playing it anymore, plus there were rumors that Nintendo would be releasing a new console next year, so Silicon Knights feared that the game would fall into the dark depths of obscurity and wouldn't sell very well. So they decided to hold off on the game and wait for Nintendo's next console, the Nintendo GameCube, codenamed the Dolphin around that time. 2. The Nintendo 64 didn't have the right power they wanted for this game. They wanted to do a lot more with this game than what they already had on that cartridge, giving it a more scary look and polish to it, and up the psychological factor that the game had. So they took the Resident Evil approach and scrapped the Nintendo 64 version of the game and moved it over to the Nintendo GameCube shortly after, with the game first getting announced in 2001 at E3, along with Super Smash Bros. Melee and a couple of other games for the GameCube, along with getting full first-party support from Nintendo rather than just making it a third-party title to help it sell better. The game saw its first release on the Nintendo GameCube in June 24, 2002, later in Japan on October 25, 2002, and in Europe the following year. The story begins with a girl by the name of Alex Roivas, who awakes to a phone call by someone by the name of Inspector Lieutenant Grass, who tells her that there has been an accident with her grandfather and wants her to come to Rhode Island to talk about what happened to her grandfather, to find out her grandfather had been decapitated. With the mystery of how her grandfather died, now it's up to her to discover what happened to her grandfather and who killed him. During this time, she comes across a mysterious room in the mansion and discovers an old book called the Tome of Eternal Darkness, an old book bound together with the skin of those who faced the terrors of it years ago. After reading the book, she starts to learn more and more about not just what happened to her grandfather, but those who faced this book and some bigger terrors that might happen to the Earth. She wants to learn more and more so she can stop this terror and figure out who killed her grandfather. Now it's up to you to solve the true mystery. Jinkies. The gameplay of the game feels very much of that like Resident Evil or Silent Hill, being that it is a survival horror game. In the game, you'll be going around the mansion finding clues, learning spells, and finding items that will help you learn more and more about what happened to Alex's grandfather. Over the course of the game, with each clue that you find, you'll be taking control of various characters from the past and discovering what happened to them with their connection to the Tome of Eternal Darkness, along with the fate that they faced during that time. Depending on what character you play as, you'll be playing in various places in time, like the Forbidden City in Persia, the Cambodian Temple, the Roivas Mansion, and the Church. Different characters can do different things and have a different setup to them depending on the time that they are from, like the weapons that they have on them, like Roman and Persian swords and crossbows to revolvers, flintlock pistols, and shotguns. With how strong they are will determine how much health they will have, how smart they are will determine how much magic they can use, and depending on how easily scared they are, depending on if they're a chicken or not, will determine how much they can take before they completely lose their sanity. In the game, you will come across various things that will make you drop your sanity, and when you do, depending on how low it is, will not only affect your character, but it'll also affect you as well. Like, say if your character comes in contact with an enemy, your character will start to freak out and lose a little bit of his or her sanity. Or, if you happen to kill another human being who happens to be alive that helps you, you will also lose a little bit of your sanity. For say, if your character's sanity is low, then your character might start to go as simple as hearing things or seeing blood dripping from the walls. Or even go as far as to have your character start to fall apart or shrink or have various enemies appear at once, only to find out it's all inside your character's head.
This isn't really happening!
Now, there are many different characters that you can get to play as in this game, ranging from different time periods, as I said earlier. Like Pius, a Roman soldier from the late 20s that gets called upon by the gods and becomes the game's main antagonist. Ella, a Cambodian slave girl and court dancer who seeks adventure after reading passages from the tomb. Not a really smart idea. Anthony, a freakish messenger ordered to deliver a message to his liege, a message that consumes Anthony in some sort of magic, which alludes him to treachery. Kurim, a Persian swordsman sent into the desert to find treasure for his love, only to end up as another victim of the Tome of Eternal Darkness. There are many others, but I don't want to spoil too much for those who haven't played this game yet. I can say, though, overall, there are 12 characters playable in total, with 11 different stories to discover from those of the past. Speaking of the past, there is another system to this game that makes it very unique. This game also has a type of system known as the knowledge or time system. At some points in time, depending on what character you play as and what you pick up or learn, can change the future and the course in which you play the game. Like, for say, if you pick up an item in some point in the game, you might be able to find that same item later on, and it will be able to be used again by whatever character you're playing as at that time. Or say if Alex reads about someone and something they did in the past, she will be able to do just that, and find more clues. Like say if someone used a certain spell, she will be able to use that spell based on what she learned. You also have the ability to make later spells and discover them earlier depending on the kinds of runes that you gain during the game already. So say if you have the right runes to make certain spells, you will have access to them earlier in the game. This is one of the most important things to use, because doing this will unlock certain secrets in the game that can come very useful to you later on. However, the spells do seem a little bit overpowered to me. It seems like almost through the course of the game, once you've collected enough runes, you can pretty much abuse some of the spells that you have collected. Like spells to summon monsters, to have them fight and kill other monsters, spells to summon a shield around you to prevent damage, and even a spell that kills all the enemies on the screen. Except for bosses, of course. However, your magic meter can only do so much, so even with it being so overpowered, it still takes a while to recharge your magic anyway, so I suppose that's acceptable. Now let's talk about the enemies. You see, in this game there are 4 different types of enemies, ran by 4 different types of ancients. Unioth, Zelototh, Chachurga, and the dying god Mantarok. Each of these ancients control different monsters, but they're all about the same. The enemies include zombies, which depending on the ancient range from a meaty monster, a mummy-looking thing, a blue, gooey-looking thing, I don't got a clue, and the dying god only being able to bring forth his skeleton-looking monsters. But they're still zombies. The Terrors, giant 3-headed beast-like things that have the ability to attack with magic and drain your sanity meter multiple times, rather than just once or twice. They do, however, move very slowly, and they do a lot of damage once up close, so be very careful with these things. The Trappers are small little scorpion-looking creatures that once near the player can trap you inside another dimension. You can escape once you find the portal, which isn't very hard at all. What you need to do is wait for the right color to appear on the platform, and you will be able to get back to the game. However, this can also be very useful, as in the dimension you will also be able to regain health, magic, and some of your sanity. Though as useful as it can be, it also kind of gets annoying when you constantly keep going there, but hey, just don't get close to them and you'll be just fine. And finally, the Bone Thief. These things are like the hell dogs of this game. They have sharp blades for hands that like to cut open the flesh of its victim and take control of their body using them as a host, making it very hard to tell who's human and who's possessed by these things.
There is little to save you from the power of Chitauri.
They can get annoying as they move kind of fast and like to lounge at you like a hunter from Resident Evil. And they're very hard to kill if you're using a melee weapon. And it appears if you're using a ranged weapon, they can also dodge, so it seems like you can never lay a hit on them half the time. Now, one last thing I want to mention before I end off the review here is the controls. Now, for the controls of the game, I don't have much to say. They're not bad, but they're not great either. If you've ever played Resident Evil, then you should know what I mean, because the controls are close to that of Resident Evil, only more slippery. It seems like when it comes to moving your character, the controls feel like your character sometimes in a smaller area is moving on ice or something. And the turning feels a little weird as well, like there's a delay in the turning. To attack, you use the A button, which is doubled as the action button, like in Resident Evil. You can also lock on using the R button, which, from my view, is a tad slow. But it is like that in some other games, same with swinging your weapon. But it all matters on how big your weapon is in the game, really. The X button is used for sneaking around, mainly to avoid trappers. The B button is also the action button, though it's used differently. It's used for reloading, finishing enemies when they're down, pulling switches, and opening doors. You can also use the Z button for instant reload when you need to. The D-pad is used quite well for the spell system in the game, as a hotkey for say. You can select 4 different random spells and place them in different order to your liking, which will allow you to select a spell without having to go into your menu, which I like quite a bit. The Y button is also used as a hotkey as well, which is pretty cool in my opinion. Now, one thing I forgot to mention earlier that I want to bring up now because it's one of the most important parts of the whole game. You see, when you play as Pius, you're able to pick your path in the game. You have 3 total. Each ancient you select will pick a different path, making the game slightly different, making most of the enemies in the game made by that ancient. So, for say if you pick Chachurga, most of the enemies will belong to Chachurga, making the main weakness of the game Xelatoth. I like this concept because it makes it so once you beat the game, you can go back and select another one of the 2 paths and play the games through another perspective. Also, it really adds to the replay value, and that's something I love in games like this, is the amount of replay value. I'm aware some games do something similar to this, but there aren't that many. I feel like there could be another game like this if another company puts enough effort into this concept. Well, overall, I think Eternal Darkness is a pretty fun and entertaining game, and very worthy of being called a survival horror game. The game isn't perfect by any means, but not every game has to be a masterpiece for it to be good. It has its flaws, yes, but with a great story, the interesting sanity concept, along with giving you fun hours of gameplay, I'd say it's worth a pickup. The game normally goes for pretty cheap online, around $10 to $25 US, on places like eBay and Amazon, which is your best bet if you're going to get this game, and it is worth it for the most part, in the end. Overall, I gave Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem a 3 out of 5. This has been Mr. VIB113. I'll see y'all later, gang. Take care.
Eons have passed since then, and I have learned much. Chaturga's power filled me, invigorating my dead body. With a touch, I could level buildings, rend the ground asunder, and channel power such as mortal men could only dream. Face me, and you shall surely perish.